there's no question the anecdotes were terrible anecdotes. There's some question how much the test was responsible versus the way the test was run, and how much would FDA regulation really improve that versus more stringent, clear regulation that's going into the laboratory. So there's a whole host of questions about where the breakdown was with some of these tests. Clearly, some of the tests weren't performing, but there are some laboratory issues here as well, which is what makes it complex, right?
Right, exactly. Right. I think it's an interesting issue, and I think the academic center piece is also an interesting one, because to some degree I do think they'll get kind of carved out, whether it's intentionally or not.
Yeah. I don't think the Memorial Sloan Ketterings and MD Andersons and University of Michigan are going to stop or be forced to stop because they're going to do it for their own patients,
I think that's right.
And it will be allowed by the current rules.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that's how a lot of innovation in oncology always unfolded. Local institutions that had expertise in one area being able to promulgate a diagnostic test and use it responsibly. So you wouldn't want to shut that down. I think there's a lot of fear that that's what will get shut down.
Right, I don't think it will, but I do think that that's something that certainly the administration's not going to, they'll get a lot of feedback from I think important constituents who have been doing this for a long time.
Right.
I think what will get shut down, though, is individual hospitals who have bought ion torrent machines for $1 million and are doing their own analyses. I don't think they'll be able to survive just doing it on their own patients, so I think that will change.
Yeah.
But I think in the larger picture, we've got two issues. We've got two parts of any test. One is running the test, getting the results, and the second is interpreting those results. What does this molecular mutation mean for this individual patient? And then probably the third phase is how do you communicate that to the patient? And I think there's a big gap right now, I think, in the ability of most clinicians to take that information and use it in clinical decision making. That's why there are so many companies out there today that are selling their services to interpret results and then put them in a format that physicians can understand. I think that's probably the weak link right now, is our ability to oversee how these tests are being used in the real world. We pay for next-gen sequencing today in a limited number of circumstances for patients who have difficult-to-treat cancers, rare cancers, who have failed first and second-line therapies. And it's remarkable when these tests are ordered, the concordance between the result and how physicians are actually treating the patient. That's where I think we need additional oversight. That's not going to be provided by the FDA, but there needs to be a solution to that. I would argue that that payers today don't have the ability to track outcomes for patients. We don't get stage of information. It's difficult to collect. We don't have a national system like they do in the European Union for tracking different kinds of cancer, how patients are treated, and the outcomes that are associated with that. So I don't think we don't have the ability to do that today. So I don't know that we have the infrastructure as payers alone to monitor test results and how patients are being treated.
The only way to postulate, I think, how FDA regulation would change that proposition that you're laying out is you could argue, well, FDA regulation is going to make it much more expensive for these tests to come to market, and so the hurdle's higher. Therefore, in order to get the capital to develop these tests in the first place, you're going to need to demonstrate the use case up front. Because a lot of these tests, admittedly, do come into the clinical realm without a lot of data around how they could impact patient care, because a lot of it's done through experimentation and through the actual use of these tests. So if you're forced to have to surmount a very expensive regulatory process, you're going to need to have that use case up front and develop that data. So that it could impact what you're talking about, but the FDA regulation isn't meant to address that challenge. So that challenge will remain, and
it will.
The question is how will it get addressed.
Right. And that I do not think the administration's going to do, absolutely cannot do in the last year.
Right.
But I think those are going to be questions that, just like you started that process in your time in government, that's going to continue to kind of get handed down. And I think where it's really aligning is probably something we'll get to later around where does this conversation intersect with this broader kind of value conversation, and will there be a role? I think John's exactly right that most physicians, let's put our physician hats back on, most physicians get some of these tests, especially the ones that are patient-directed, that one can pay out of pocket and do themselves. And physicians are caught kind of going, I actually don't know what's happening. We've seen in the Mid-Atlantic region a rise in referrals to genetic counselors, mostly because of a lot of the LDTs that offer even kind of a direct-to-consumer strategy for this screening. And most physicians, even community and academic-based oncologists, are not equipped with how to explain this.